experiencing an epidemic of monetized and commercialized elective politics, which is a threat multiplier of democratic backsliding. Unregulated money in elections is further raising the stakes and turning electoral races into violent political battles in many African countries. When money becomes the main motivator for political socialization and determinant of electoral outcomes, it defeats the democratic principle of elections, reflecting the will of the people as they become a reflection of the power of money. Unfortunately, the legal and institutional framework for campaign financing in most African countries is either very weak or non-existent. In Kenya, Nigeria, Madagascar, and Tanzania, progressive laws have been enacted. The issue is reluctance to implement them. Additionally, there is lack of a vibrant continental coalition of citizen observers advocating for transparency in political financing. Alliance for Finance Monitoring, ACFIM, has brought together like-minded organizations from across the continent in response to the threat posed by monetization and commercialization of elective politics.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Fred Musisi Munagomba. I'm a member of the board of the Alliance for Finance Monitoring, ACFIM. I am the board treasurer. On behalf of the board of directors of the Alliance for Finance Monitoring, ACFIM, the Pan-African Political Finance Watchdog and think tank, I welcome you all to the third edition of the annual conference on money in politics in Africa under the theme Campaign Finance Transparency. Over the past 3 years, Alliance for Finance Monitoring has made efforts to take the discussion on money in politics in Africa to audiences across Africa and in the global north. It is our historical mission to build a continental coalition of CSOs advocating for campaign finance transparency that can make significant contribution to Africa's democratic renewal. I am very confident that this third edition is going to do justice to the subject matter. I thank you so much for joining, and let me wish you all insightful discussions. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Fred Musisi, who is the board member of ACFIM, Alliance for Finance Monitoring, who are proudly bringing you this third edition of the virtual conference on money in politics in Africa 2023. My name is Felix Kafuma. I'm the moderator for the session. And also the session is being hosted by ACFIM, and they are the conveners of the session, and allow me also to provide the background and why are we here, the objectives of the conference, and what do we expect from the conference. But once again, let me also add my voice to welcome everybody who's joining us. Welcome to the virtual conference on money in politics in Africa. To everybody who is joining us live across Africa, across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, a very special welcome to this special virtual conference on money in politics in Africa. We are live across our social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. It's ACFIM Africa. You can get us there and be part of the conversation. Our hashtag is money politics in Africa. Again, I repeat, money politics in Africa. You can put your thoughts, your comments, your questions. We'll be able to pick them up. And this conference is also, I need to let you know, it's bilingual, taking care of the French speaking, the Francophone. And also you can be able to choose the language of your choice from the Zoom window below on the icon of language selection. And you can select and be part of this conversation. Karibuni, once again, you're welcome. It's a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're catching us from. Just to let you know that this conference is aimed at increasing the understanding of the role of money in politics in Africa and the challenges it poses for democratic renewal. It also aims at exploring the regulatory and non-regulatory options relating to the issue, what is currently feasible in terms of monitoring online campaign financing. It's also aimed at developing an action plan for building a continental coalition of civil society organizations advocating for campaign finance transparency. So we expect at the end of these 2 days to increase the understanding of the role of money in politics in Africa, but also explore the regulatory and non-regulatory options relating to the issue and propose solutions to remedy the situation at hand, and lastly, lay the ground for continental initiative on political finance transparency. With me, allow me to introduce also my panel. I have a panel of 4 gentlemen, and allow me also to, first of all, make an apology that the lineup of our panel is predominantly male. It was not intentional. It's just that in terms of booking confirmations, we were only able to, for this panel, to have only men available. But we are cognizant that there are very many women out there who are also experts on the subject that would have loved to make a contribution. So I register the apologies for having an all-male cast, but allow me to introduce my panel, which has four participants, starting with Henry Muguzi, who is a political scientist, the social researcher, and a seasoned campaign finance expert. He's also the founding executive director of Alliance for Finance Monitoring, ACFIM, which is a Pan-African civil society organization. He co-authored a publication recently titled Money Controlled Voter Consent, an extended study on campaign financing for Uganda's general elections in 2021. And at some point, he will be sharing the insights from that study. Henry, you are most welcome.
Thank you, Felix. Colleagues that have joined us from wherever you have, an honor for me to be here. Looking forward to an insightful discussion.
It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure. Our second participant or panelist I'm introducing is Theophilus Benda from Sierra Leone. Theophilus is a career journalist, having a span of 20 years of experience. He's also a social commentator, a human rights campaigner, and having won a number of prestigious awards in his line of work. He's currently the executive director of Community Media Network, which brings together 50 radio stations spread across Sierra Leone. You are most welcome, Theophilus.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
It's a pleasure having you. The next panelist that I'm introducing is Ernest Mpararo from Democratic Republic of Congo. I hope your camera is on and I hope you can hear us. Ernest is an anti-corruption expert, is the executive secretary of the Ligue Congolais de lutte contre la corruption, Ligue COCO, which is also a host to Transparency International's Democratic Republic of Congo, and is also an alumni of the Anti-Corruption Academy in Vienna, IACA, and he has served on the board of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption Coalition. Ernest, you are most welcome. I hope you're on set. And I kindly ask you to put on your camera, Ernest, if you don't mind.
Oui, bon,
All right.
oui, bonjour, bonjour à tous. Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation-là.
Merci beaucoup. Our last panelist that I'm introducing is Tafzwa Chikumbu from Zimbabwe, who is the current executive director of Transparency International Zimbabwe, which is also part of the global movement against corruption. Is also the anti-corruption expert and development economist. Chikumbu, you're most welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Felix, and welcome everyone.
It's a pleasure. So let's get this off the ground once again. You can catch us live on our social media platforms. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our hashtag is Money Politics in Africa. So let me start with you, Henry. Picking it up from the study that you conducted in 2021, having observed those elections, can you share the insights of what are the key things coming out of that study, Henry?
Thank you very much, Felix. And so colleagues, in 2020-2021, we were able, as the Alliance for Finance Monitoring in Uganda, to conduct an extended study on the financing of election campaigns for the elections of 2021. And so I am happy today to share with you the findings, and I hope that these key findings will help trigger the discussion on the panel, because I'm also, inquisitive to learn from the contexts of colleagues of DRC, Zambia, but also Sierra Leone. Now, so we have titled this report "The Banknote Controlled Bank Consent," because of what happened. And allow me to start it like this. So we aimed at tracking the general elections of Uganda and to understand a number of phenomena. First of all, we set out to understand the actions and behaviors of voters and candidates. We wanted to establish where the money comes from. We wanted to establish how it is used, but also to be able to understand how it ultimately impacts on electoral outcomes. So we set out with 3 objectives. The first objective was to assess the efficacy of Uganda's electoral legal framework in regulating money in elective politics. And contrast that with the practice. So we wanted to understand the practice, but also the law and the practice. But also we wanted to analyze the extent to which money influences electoral outcomes and why. Why should money be so powerful to influence electoral outcomes? And thirdly, we set out to establish other factors aside from money that influence the decision of voters and consequently the outcome of elections. All right. These are the key observations. For starters, that Uganda elections 2021 was the most costly electoral campaign process in terms of campaign spending. It was the most expensive the nation had ever seen. We estimated that a total of $1.09 billion was pumped into electioneering activities by political parties and candidates that participated in this election at the level of presidential, at parliamentary, at local government levels. Now, in terms of comparative analysis, we looked at what we had monitored and computed in the previous election in 2016. And you get to see that there is a stark contrast in terms of spending, that the spending of 2021 almost doubled that of the previous election. All right. So what did the candidates spend on? There are 2 outlying or 3 outlying bars here. The first one is on the left, which is pre-campaign spending. So we discovered that most of the spending was done prior to the regulated campaign period. And so I will interrogate what exactly where that went. The other pillar that is tall enough was that concerning was that most of the spending went into voter inducement. And voter inducement, ladies and gentlemen, we refer to all those actions or activities that are intended to, to lure voters, including the outright vote buying, where they provide cash, the provision of gifts, the donations of goods and services, including offering to extend electricity power lines to areas where they haven't, grading community roads, building bridges, and doing all those things that would make you look as if you are generous to the electorate. And of course, the other one is campaign administration. So in terms of pre-campaign spending, if you look at this graph, the yellow color shows that most of the spending in the pre-campaign period went into works and social services. And these include the opening up or grading of community roads. And the reason they grade these is so that they can look to be kind and nice and be liked by the electorate. These are forms of voter inducement. Some of them extended water supply lines to families that do not have these. And now the other tallest bar went into what we termed as donations in kind. There were donations where the candidates would donate things like, food. They would donate apparel. They would donate bicycles, motorcycles. They donated roofing materials to churches that were not completed. But there were also cash donations. If you look at the blue bar there, so it tells you that during the pre-campaign period, even that spending there, the spending that you can point out that may have gone into legitimate campaign activities is that which was spent on consultative meetings, on party primaries, on publicity, but the rest of the spending you would see went into areas that would induce voters, which you can now summarize as vote buying. So we also set out to compare the spending of the incumbent of presidential candidate, and we discovered that the incumbent presidential candidate, General Yoweri Museveni, outfoxed and crowded out all the other 10 candidates that were contesting with him in terms of spending. The question then is, what did he spend on? So how did the General Museveni spend his money? You would again see that a lot of his spending went into what you would call voter hospitality. Voter hospitality are those things that you do to the electorate to be seen to be nice to them, such as throwing banquets, such as extending freebies to them, such as providing them with free things. That was voter hospitality. And of course, the other areas he spent money on were campaign administration, the paraphernalia, publicity, campaign events, pre-campaign and election day activities. But in terms of gender, we cannot do this without the gender aspect. And we learned that majority of the spending, which is 89%, was done by male. So it further shows you how the female candidates in Africa have continued, in Uganda, and could be the case in Africa, will here as well, have continued to be edged out and and excluded from participating in the electoral processes. We are seeing fewer and fewer names of females on the ballot papers, simply on the technicality of failing to access campaign money. In that report, we also point out the fact, make an observation that money was actually used to procure unopposed status. We had 11 candidates at the level of parliamentary races who stood unopposed. Unopposed means that he has no contestant. Basically, he's nominated as a single person, and when it goes through to be declared winner, because there is no contestant. Out of the 11 candidates, 3 were cabinet ministers. And when we probed, of course, there were also 7 unopposed candidates at district of government level. And when we probed, we discovered that in all these cases, it is money that was used to buy off the aspiring candidates to drop out of the race and leave them unopposed, stand-alone, contest alone. So, which is why we then argue that the banknote was used in this case to undermine political competition, which of course is one of the factors that explain the decline of democracy in Africa. So you would have noted that there was this movement headed by a presidential contestant, Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi, also known as Bobi Wine. So he had a strong movement codenamed People Power. And we saw that in the Central Region, the People Power movement was able to defeat the power of money. And so we learned that, we discovered that many, if not all, the ministers, cabinet ministers that contested in the Central Region lost to newcomers who stood as representatives of the National Unity Platform Party that belonged to the Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi. Now, in terms of the power of the banknote still, we analyzed the cases of the winners and the losers and the data on how they were spending. We discovered that in 71.4% of the cases, it's the candidates that spent more that went on to garner the highest number of votes cast and won the election. So money worked in 71.4% of the cases. There's a mistake there down, 86% was a mistake, sorry. So 71.4% of the cases where big spenders went on to be declared winners of the election. It means, therefore, you can now conclude that actually money did determine influence electoral outcomes. We pointed out to the issue of opacity in campaign financing. The sources of money that financed the elections of Uganda in 2021 remains unknown. Okay? We don't know where it came from. The men and women who spent it did not disclose. The political parties did not disclose. And of course, now we are learning one of the opposition political parties is having divisions and quarrels, which could lead to a split of that political party. And the political party is the Forum for Democratic Change. They are fighting over what they say is money that came from data sources and funded their candidates, the presidential candidate. We also discovered in that report and highlight that data money found its way into financing political parties and candidates for the elections. And this could be the case as well in other African countries. Data money refers to that money that comes from unclean sources. Some of it comes from proceeds of corruption. Of it comes from all other forms of illicit dealings that are not clean. We established a nexus between campaign finance and money laundering, and we found that data money was actually laundered through campaign finance donations to political parties and candidates for quid pro quo reasons. So companies and individuals that were vying for government contracts were able to finance candidates, especially those that were progressive, in order for them to be able to pay them back in the form of public contracts. We also saw the acquisition of real estates in form of land purchases, but also the acquisition of luxurious apartments, the purchase of luxurious automobiles during the time of campaigns. And we allude to the fact that all this money that did this was data money that was being laundered during this period, because campaign period comes with some pressure, but also dynamics that would render many of these transactions not subject to scrutiny. So they can fly below the radar in that regard. So in conclusion, we argue that whereas genuine elections should reflect the free will, the free expression of the will of the electors in the context of Uganda's highly monetized and commercialized politics. The election outcome was by and large an expression of the power of money and the might of security forces. So that is, in brief, is the findings. I didn't want to take much time so that we can trigger now discussion. And that report is available on the website of ACFIM, www.acfim.org. You'll find it there. So I thank you very much, Felix. Let me stop.
Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing the insights of that report, that study. That is an extended study which looked at how the 2021 elections were financed. Those figures are quite staggering. I know among the panelists I have, I know DRC is about to go into its elections, probably next year, if I'm not mistaken. Zimbabwe is coming from a very heavily contested election. Experiences will be very, very useful here. I know Sierra Leone is also coming from another very interesting election. So I cannot be more happy to have this cast that is to share what is the experience. And I think it's even a very timely conversation and relevant to that point. And let me start with you, Theophilus, because I equally followed the Sierra Leone elections. Could you give us a sense of how money was a factor in the just concluded elections in Sierra Leone, and to what extent the electoral outcomes hinged on the influence of money?
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I want to first and foremost say thank you to Henry for a job well done. And I want to say that their findings are entirely reflective in our local politics. So which means, I mean, it's good that we are talking about it in the African context, but I will narrow it down to the Sierra Leone context, given that I am coming from this part of the world. And like you said, we just came from our crucially contested general elections, I mean, which even now remain a topical issue, because as far as the political system is concerned, I mean, we have a democratic system of governance, which means there's always a ruling party and an opposition. But of course, over time, we've seen that our elections have been characterized by so many things, so many things. Some people call them irregularities, others call them, different types of names. But the fact of the matter now is that we have a situation wherein the elections were conducted on June 24. Elections were, the results were announced, and then the opposition said, we are not going to accept this result because we think it is cooked up. And so they say they are going to boycott all governance cooperation. They have refused to go to the House of Parliament, even though there are elected members of Parliament from the opposition, All People's Congress. They have so far refused to go to Parliament. They say they are boycotting all government business. And they have also refused to take their seats in the local councils and all of that. And the international community, especially the American, the USA, England, and to some extent the European Union, have all expressed concern over the way and manner in which the elections went, and they have raised issues of credibility and integrity. But now to the issue of campaign funding, or campaign financing. It's a very crucial matter. It's a very, very controversial matter. And oftentimes it is shrouded in secrecy, as Henry stated in their findings. And of course, not only that, all over the world, campaign financing has become very, very crucial, especially in view of the fact that, the potential of rogues taking advantage by way of investing in politics in return for favors, contracts, control over things, and even elective or appointive positions, like being appointed as a cabinet minister or any other diplomatic appointment or whatever. So for them, they invest in politics expecting to get rewarded. And here in Africa, Sierra Leone, for instance, which is a very, very poor country, we have a situation wherein some of those vying to become president do not really have the financial muscle. So they rely on others internally and externally to keep up their campaign financing. And the fact of the matter is that money plays it all in most cases. Without money, you are not able to embark on effective campaigning. Like Brother Henry spoke about inducement. That is so crucial. For here in Sierra Leone, and I believe in most parts around Africa, the only time you see the president, the elected president, who is coming or who is going in for a runoff, the only time you see him going very, very low to the people, even dancing on the stage, is during the election. After that, you will never see him again. You will never have any access to him, nothing else. And of course, one thing I always say is that democracy is defined very crucially as government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So therefore, monetizing our election is very crucial, especially when it comes to inducement. Because here in Sierra Leone, Guinea, money plays a huge part in determining the outcome of elections. But I tell you, what plays the greater part is the mindset of the people. Because here in Sierra Leone, the country is divided along tribal and regional lines. And we have two key political parties. We have the current ruling Sierra Leone People's Party, which has its stronghold in the southern and eastern parts of the country, whilst the current opposition party, the All People's Congress, has its stronghold in the western area and the northern part of the country. And these parts are tribally dominated. So most times, people vote based on tribe, not based on the issues, not based on whether they are suffering or not. They feel gratified that their tribal party is in office. Whether throughout the tenure of that party, they don't experience any change in their life, they don't care. It doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is that they feel safe when it is their own tribal party that is in power. And over time, we see the politicians taking advantage of that. They take advantage of that to an extent that it is not so much about spending anymore. Rather, it is by being comfortable that, I never need to go and campaign to them. They will just vote for me. So, unfortunately, the mindset of the people is not changing. And I don't see it coming any closer. So, in other words, politically, the country will always remain like this. That is why for some of us have said, we have lost faith in democracy. We have lost faith in democracy because oftentimes the governments that emerge have questions around them as to whether they are really by the people. And the element of democracy, like I said before, is of the people, by the people, and for the people. So if any one of those elements are missing, then which means we are talking about a stolen mandate. And so democracy is not just about going into the elections, it's about how transparent the process is. So like I said earlier, here it's not just about money determining the outcome of the election, but also the mindset of the people. And we also have a situation wherein state institutions are captured by the ruling party. For instance, the current head of the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone is deemed to be a member of the current ruling party. So if that is the case, why money will play its part in this area, inducement will play its part in this other area, but capturing this institution that is conducting the election also plays the major role in it all. For instance, we have a situation wherein a sitting member of parliament called Mohamed Bangura, he is from the opposition All People's Congress, whilst his party has decided to boycott all governance engagement, including not going to parliament, he was actually elected alongside other opposition MPs. But he decided to say, I am going to go against the decision of the party of us not going to take our seats in the House of Parliament because of disagreement over the results. And he granted an interview to a radio station, and he was saying that after they had concluded their own election in his own constituency, which is Kaina district, he said the ruling SLPP, Sierra Leone People's Party, from the RRF forms. The RRF forms is where you tabulate where you enter all the votes for each candidate and each political party. He said the RRF form for the ruling Sierra Leone People's Party contains 9,000 votes. 9,000 votes. But when the Electoral Commission was announcing the results for the ruling party, the Electoral Commission said the party got 19,000 votes. And this is not coming from me. It is coming from the elected member of parliament whose RRF form for the ruling Sierra Leone People's Party indicates 9,000 votes. But when the Electoral Commission that conducts the election was doing the announcement, they announced 19,000 votes. So the question is, where did the 10,000 extra votes come from?
All right.
Where did they come from?
As you bring it to a close, I will come back to you on that one, on the question, because you're raising issues around the independence and the integrity of the EMB, and how money does capture such institutions. I'm coming back to that. Thank you so much, Theophilus. And allow me here to bring in Tafswa to share your experience. I'm speaking to same question which I raised earlier. Whether you relate with what's happening and you've just come off an election, how significant was money in determining the electoral outcomes? Just in 5 minutes, can you share your experience? Chikumbu, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, Felix. How are you?
Great.
Sorry, let me put up my video as well. Thank you very much for providing us an opportunity to speak about political party financing and specifically campaign financing. You know, it is very important to have this conversation. But I think the people that get excited at such conversations include those countries that either are just coming out of an election or those that are about to get into elections. And more often we do forget about such conversations. And I'm happy that Uganda, having gone through your elections in 2021, are also still championing the discussion. So it's something which is quite commendable. That is number one. Number two, I think the discussion around political party financing and campaign financing is also becoming quite prevalent at global level and also in some of our countries. But in some countries, people are still quiet about it, but they know that there are implications associated with opaque political party financing. So for me, I need to mention that in Zimbabwe, there are quite a number of issues that are raised in relation to both political party financing and also to campaign financing. And the first is that there is uneven access to campaign financing in Zimbabwe, starting straight from the state resources, where the government says through the Political Party Financing Act of 2001, that there shall be a proportional allocation of state resources on the basis of the parliamentary representation for each political party, which means independent candidates are not supported. And also that those that get less than 5% of the votes or the members of parliament is also not supported. And one of the key concerns which continuously comes out of any election in Zimbabwe is the misuse of state resources. Misuse of state resources. Because you would find out that the ruling party, ZANU-PF, ordinarily is more money for financing, either the money that comes straight from the national coffers, or just abuse of state resources, including the abuse of state media, both electronic, written, and all kinds of media. And also the abuse of state resources also contributes to clientelism, which ordinarily is referred to as vote buying, with some of the government ministers appearing before the campaign rallies, where they offer, goods and services to the electorate. And in this case, in most cases, it's actually support around agricultural inputs, which may be in the form of fertilizers, maize seed, and all other kind of things. And there's also a record of abuse of social welfare hampers, where the government has hampers for social welfare. They are all diverted towards political campaigning, which actually leaves the poor and vulnerable in need, yet they do benefit a few. And in terms of political party financing in Zim, there's also an aspect of disenfranchisement emanating from the increase in nomination fees for political players in Zimbabwe. In our recent election, for instance, for one to contest as a president, they had to pay a nomination fee of $20,000, a figure that was risen from $1,000 to $20,000. So not so many people, even those that are willing to participate in elections, can be able to do so. And this is something that has also been raised by the election observer missions that were observing elections in Zimbabwe, something that leaves mainly women and young people alienated from the electoral processes. And what is also quite clear in our Political Party Finance Act of 2001 is that it prohibits any foreign funding coming into Zimbabwe, either that which comes directly to a political party or that which comes indirectly, either through civil society or any other third party to political parties. And we have also seen, just like what has been mentioned from your report, that there is also the role of private sector in funding elections and actually funding campaigns. which also compromises and contributes to political corruption, where those companies that contribute to funding of political party functions, they are also rewarded through the tender process once that particular political party comes into government. So it's something that also remains very critical and imminent in our country. And I think what is also disturbing is the fact that there is limited public disclosure in terms of the alternative sources of funding are coming from. Because when you look at our ruling party, for instance, the magnitude of funding is so intense and huge to the extent that each member of parliament ahead of the elections, candidate for each member of parliament, they do have their 4x4 cars, they do have resources to sponsor their own individual campaigns, apart from the mass campaigns that are jointly conducted with the head of state, who will be a candidate for elections. So that amount of money, where it is coming from and who is actually putting in the resources and how it is used is actually not disclosed, which remains an issue within the realm of political party financing and also electoral campaigns. Then finally, the issue of incentives, which have also been raised in the observer mission reports, where towards or in the run-up to the elections, there were a lot of payments which were made by government to senior civil servants, even including the ministers themselves, the judges of the High Court, the members of parliament, which compromises in terms of their independence. Because when you look at the judges of the High Court, it also includes the chairperson of the Electoral Commission itself, and also senior civil servants. And government, to circumvent civil society organizations, they only projected that these amounts were actually given as loans, which shall be repaid. So this is how they've actually managed to circumvent that. But actually, when you look at the amounts that were involved, for each of the ministers, in excess of 30 ministers, they were actually getting $500,000 each. Judges of the High Court were getting in excess of 300,000. Members of parliament, 210, plus senators, 60, women quota, they were actually getting 40,000 each. And also some senior civil servants were also getting those exorbitant amounts of money. So when you look at the issue around political party financing and campaign financing in particular, there are quite a number of gray areas that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure during the course of our conversation, we'll be given an opportunity to speak about some of the key recommendations that we could possibly proffer to ensure that we address these challenges. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tafadzwa. Quite interesting. It's as if our leaders are reading from the same script, mentioning about those incentives that stick to the pre-campaigning that also happened back in Uganda. I think I can respect to that at some point. But let me bring on board here our good friend from DRC, Ernest. I know you are almost heading into an election very soon, and from your experiences, how is money shaping up the campaign season and also having a factor in influencing electoral outcomes? Share your experiences from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour m'avoir donné cette opportunité de présenter cette importante thématique qui touche presque tous les continents africains. Et d'ailleurs, vous venez de les suivre. Il y a élection il y a quelques jours au Gabon et aujourd'hui, il y a un coup d'État. Cela montre que le pays et le continent est en train quand même de se réveiller un tout petit peu parce que imaginez un président qui fait 50 ans au pouvoir et qui utilise tous les deniers publics, tous les fonds publics pour financer sa propre campagne, pour corrompre. Et la conséquence est ce que nous vivons actuellement au Gabon. Effectivement, en République démocratique du Congo, nous organisons les élections en décembre 2023. Donc, d'ici 2, 3 ou 4 mois, nous aurons les élections présidentielles, législatives, provinciales et, je pense, locales aussi. Mais la question que nous nous posons effectivement, d'où vient l'argent que les partis politiques ou les candidats vont utiliser pour faire campagne afin de financer leur campagne électorale? D'où viendra l'argent? C'est ça la question qu'on se pose. Et en RDC, nous avons une loi votée en 2004, le 15 mars 2004, qui organise le fonctionnement des partis politiques. Et lorsque vous lisez la loi, en ces articles 21 et en ces articles 22, il y a un paragraphe qui dit que les subventions des partis politiques donc les partis politiques peuvent avoir des subventions éventuelles de l'État. Des subventions éventuelles. Cela n'est pas dit que l'État doit financer les activités des partis politiques. Il n'est pas dit ça. C'est éventuel, probablement. Éventuel, c'est ça. Donc, cela veut dire que celui qui est au pouvoir, il peut voir est-ce que les partis d'opposition sont forts. Si les partis d'opposition ne sont pas forts, il ne peut pas financer les activités des partis politiques. Et s'il constate que les partis politiques sont faibles, peut-être ils peuvent leur donner quelque chose. Mais ce n'est pas vraiment une exigence de l'État de financer les activités des partis politiques. Alors la question qu'elle se pose, si l'État ne finance pas les partis politiques, d'où vient l'argent? Et c'est ça le thème principal de cette conférence, qui est vraiment pertinente, et je pense que nous devons conjuguer les efforts ensemble, parce que ce sont les mêmes pratiques qui se passent. Si j'ai écouté la Sierra Leone, je viens d'écouter le Zimbabwe, et l'Ouganda aussi, presque c'est la même chose. Ce n'est pas différent de la RDC, étant donné qu'avec les élections qui viennent, nous avons déjà 910 partis politiques, avec les élections de décembre 2023. Ceux qui se sont engagés, c'est les candidats les groupements politiques, les partis politiques, c'est au nombre de 910 partis politiques. C'est à peu près 23 000 candidats pour 500 postes de membres du Parlement, pour à peu près 120 postes de sénateurs et quelques dizaines de postes des assemblées provinciales. Donc, nous avons plus de 23 000, chers frères. Et pourquoi les gens sont intéressés par les politiques? La réponse est que c'est parce que c'est la politique qui paye mieux. Pourquoi la politique paye mieux? C'est parce que, lorsque vous êtes député, vous avez 21 000 $ de salaire moyen par mois. 21 000 $, sans compter les avantages. C'est presque le même montant lorsque vous êtes sénateur. Lorsque vous êtes député au niveau de province, c'est à peu près 10 à 12 000 $ qu'on vous paye. Alors, les gens voient, donc si moi je suis député aussi, je peux gagner 21 000, et c'est cet engouement-là, c'est cet engouement qui amène à ce que les gens créent des partis sans toutefois respecter les dispositions ou la loi qui régit le fonctionnement des partis politiques. Maintenant, étant donné que l'État ne finance pas, étant donné que les candidats, ils sont nombreux, qui s'empressent pour accéder, et nous pouvons dire accéder aux mangeoires, accéder aux avantages qu'on donne aux politiques lorsqu'ils gagnent les élections, d'où vient l'argent? En RDC, la plupart des partis ou des gens qui sont au pouvoir, ils créent des structures parallèles pour qu'il y ait des rétrocommissions. Donc, moi, j'étais patronne, il y a quelque chose qu'on appelle comme patronage d'État. Donc, je te soutiens, je te fais nommer à une structure de l'État, Et lorsque tu arrives là-bas, tu as de l'argent, tu commences à me retourner, une rétrocommission. Tu commences à financer les activités. Et c'est cette manne d'argent qui provient des services publics, qui provient des caisses de l'État, qui font vivre les partis politiques, plus particulièrement ceux qui sont au pouvoir. Et maintenant, ceux qui sont à l'opposition, comment ils font? La loi qui régit le fonctionnement des partis politiques en RDC interdit à ce qu'un parti puisse avoir des fonds provenant d'un pays étranger. C'est interdit. Mais comment est-ce qu'ils gagnent? Ils trouvent l'argent. La plupart des opposants actuellement, ce sont des anciens politiciens qui étaient au pouvoir dans les temps, soit sous Kabila, soit sous Mobutu. Et ils ont pu amasser beaucoup de moyens. Certains sont devenus des hommes d'affaires qui ont investi leur argent dans le business et ces business leur génèrent l'argent. Mais cela n'est pas comparable aux politiciens qui sont au pouvoir. Pourquoi? Parce que ceux qui sont au pouvoir, ils ont capturé l'État pour effectivement patronner certaines personnes qui leur rétrocèdent des moyens, surtout ceux qui sont dans le secteur des mines, qui les rétrocèdent des moyens, et c'est ces moyens-là qui leur permettent de financer leur campagne électorale. Conséquence de tout cela, ce sont des détournements énormes, ce sont des fraudes fiscales, ce sont des concussions, ce sont des favoritismes, c'est toute la corruption généralisée que les partis politiques font pour effectivement financer les campagnes électorales. D'ailleurs, l'étude du baromètre que nous avions publié, que la Likoko a publié en 2019, 80% des citoyens que nous avons interrogés ont reconnu que c'est le parti politique qui est le secteur le plus corrompu de la RDC. Pourquoi? Parce que lorsque vous voulez vous enrichir illicitement, illégalement, vous devez postuler à un poste politique. Et si vous êtes nommé à ce poste politique, il y a un patronage, quelqu'un qui t'a patronné, et vous devez rendre l'ascenseur à celui qui t'a patronné. Et je pense que c'est presque dans tous ces sens-là que nos États sont dans des situations qui arrivent même à des coups d'État actuellement. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on utilise les moyens publics pour financer les électeurs, corrompre les électeurs, donner des dons aux électeurs afin d'être élus, et dès que vous êtes élu, vous commencez à récupérer tout ce que vous avez dépensé lors de la campagne électorale. Et c'est ce qui se passe en RDC actuellement. Donc, les Zimbabwe, en écoutant les Zimbabwe, en écoutant la Sierra Leone, en écoutant l'Ouganda, il n'y a pas vraiment de grandes différences. Peut-être qu'il y a des lois où on régule, mais en RDC, la loi n'est pas appliquée et aucune sanction n'est faite contre les partis politiques.
Thank you so much, Ernest. Quite interesting. I'm still making sense of the political parties that are participating in the upcoming elections. I'll come back to that. But Henry, let me come to you straight away. Just another round of questions that will keep short in under 2 minutes. Then I can open it up to the plenary for discussions and contributions. Across everywhere, it's very clear that the issue around opacity in terms of sources of political party funding or campaign funding is the biggest and the major problem here. And we all know where sources are not known, even where the laws are not clear on declaring sources, and even where the laws are not followed. We know how that is detrimental to democracy. Coming to Uganda and probably also looking elsewhere in Africa, practically, how can we make it possible to encourage, because to encourage the knowing sources of party funding or campaign funding, that transparency around party funding sources or campaign funding sources, what is feasible for Africa, looking at Uganda's experiences and across?
So thank you, Felix. Of course, what is feasible for Africa is to make sure that there is transparency, because we have been told, and experience has proven so, that sunshine can disinfect some of these bad evils. But the problem we're having across Africa, in Uganda, for example, the opacity in financing election campaigns and political parties, because nobody gets to know where this money comes from. Those that have provided it, what have they, given as a condition? And the ones who receive it, what are they expected to deliver in return? Now, it goes back to the very foundation of the nature and driving factors for the men and women who join politics and those who form political parties. You will realize that the major driver for forming political parties in Uganda, for example, is not public good. It is private good. And therefore, if it is private good that is motivating the formation of political parties, these political parties are going to do everything possible to enrich themselves. Now, of course, to enrich themselves if they are following procedures, and most of the money that is used to enrich these men comes from mafias, but also drug lords, but also those that have engaged in all manner of as to advocate for transparency. But the other annoying thing, the other unfortunate thing is that the citizens themselves, the electors, don't seem to have an interest in this, and so the men and women that engage in monetized, commercialized elections go scot-free. We have asked ourselves a question as part of the study we're conducting. The question was, which of the political parties in Uganda, for example, is not for sale? And we discover that other than the party in power, which is well resourced, the rest of the political parties are on sale to the highest bidder. And if this is the case, then they are all going to be captured. And what we have is that many of them are captured either by the men and women that have bought them, or those that have bankrolled them to do a number of activities. And therefore, it's a concern for Africa. But the most important thing is that we need to advocate more for transparency, and we need also to sensitize the public more to understand that some of the monies they so happily take from the political candidates and political parties during campaigns is money that has come from dirty sources, from sources you don't want to know. You wouldn't want to be feasting on an animal that has been stolen. And so this is the awareness we need to build, so that the appetite from the public for these monies from the politicians can also go down, and that can also help redeem our electoral politics from being captured by the men and women who have deep pockets, but men and women that are also captured by data sources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. You're still watching our virtual conference on money and politics in Africa. And with me, I have a four-panel cast, all male, but we are trying to make sense of how influential money is on electoral outcomes. And let me come to you, Theophilus, because my understanding you're a journalist, meaning that you are able to double-click, probably get information others can't get. Looking at the case of Sierra Leone, were you able to know exactly, even when not publicly declared, the sources most of these participants in the electoral participants, especially the candidates, the sources of their funding? Were you able to establish the sources of their funding? And if so, what was the experience? And what were the challenges in terms of getting that information? And probably what can we do, picking from what Henry has just shared, how best can we promote transparency in funding of political parties, especially looking at the sources, because that's where the problem is. Theophilus, are you there? Okay, I think as Theophilus comes on, let me come to tough as well. I think even for the case of Zimbabwe, we know there was a documentary that looked at the gold mafia scandal, where Zimbabwe, like Kenya, is in that documentary concerning how gold was used to finance politics in those different countries and also influence outcomes. So coming to you, would you be able to point the possible areas where most of this money financing, especially the party in power, is coming from, the sources, and if you've had an experience of trying to point where that money is coming from, what has been your experience, and what can we realistically do to promote transparency in political party sources, including campaign financing?
Okay, thank you very much, Felix. It seems as if the French interpretation is also visible, and it's quite loud. So I don't know how you can manage that. So yeah, I don't know if that can be rectified, but thank you very much for the question that you have posed to us. Like I mentioned earlier on, only the state finances actually disclosed in terms of political party funding. However, it is it still remains shrouded in secrecy in terms of how and where the other sources of funding are coming from. But of course, specific to the case of the gold mafia, there's something which is quite interesting, which we picked during the campaign period and also post-campaign period, where some of the people that were involved in the specific case of gold mafia is alleged by Al Jazeera. One of the guys had the most funded campaign in his own constituents, to the extent that we heard that he had an opportunity to hire Mayweather from the US, come and demonstrate his boxing prowesses in a poor location here in Harare. And we also heard that the guy was given an amount in excess of $1 million to just come and do the displays. And during the campaign, there's also a video which was circulating in which the specific candidate in that constituency actually came out bragging that if you are getting money from the gold mafia and bringing it back to the community in the form of the campaign money, would that be a problem? And he did a lot of things in that particular constituency, including refurbishment of roads, carrying of baggage from the area, and so many other things that were done in that particular constituency. And unlike the findings in your report in Uganda, unfortunately, he lost in that constituency. And, the people were actually speaking and expressing themselves to say that, there's nothing that should limit them or stop them from gaining or benefiting from those kind of funds, but actually they know where they need to put their vote. So it's something which was also happening. And also there is one specific constituency which also received considerable amount of money and development during the campaign period. A constituency which was being taken by the current or the former, should I say, former finance minister, because we currently do not have ministers. That particular minister, during his campaign, he did put free Wi-Fi in his constituents, dug boreholes, and a number of things that he did for that constituents. And people were actually wondering, as the Minister of Finance, where could be his sources of funding? You know, his sources of funding were not disclosed, and either the way the amount was used or abused was actually also not disclosed. And unfortunately or fortunately, for him and the public in that particular constituents. So indeed, we realized that the use of either public funds or sources of funding that are not disclosed, their implication is that it also results in disputed elections. Because when political parties use their resources, they use to the extent that they end up abusing their own power, because money actually will be controlling everything. And at the end of the day, the election will not be free, will not be fair, will also not be credible. Like I mentioned earlier on, that the abuse of state media was one which was also cited by the observer missions, which also leads to the kind of dispute that we are currently having in terms of our election. Then specific to the key recommendations in terms of working on our legislation in our continent. As an individual working for the Global Movement Against Corruption, I would be interested in quoting the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and specifically Article Chapter 7, subsection 3, which calls upon member states to consider appropriate legislative and administrative measures to enhance transparency in funding of candidature for elected public office, and where applicable, the funding of political parties. So Article 7 provides for specific either legal framework or administrative measures to ensure that there's transparency, accountability in political party funding. It is also augmented by the African Union Convention Against Corruption, African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, specifically Article 10, which says that each state party shall adopt legislative and other measures to prescribe the use of funds required through illegal and corrupt practices to finance political parties and incorporate the principles of transparency in funding of political parties. And of course, there's also a specific provision within the SADC principles and guidelines for governing democratic elections, which also speak to political party and campaign funding, which should be done in accordance with national legislation and impartial use of public assets and funds for election campaigns. So there are already international and regional frameworks that calls for specific pieces of legislation to ensure that there's transparency, accountability, and public disclosure in terms of where the money is coming from, and also in terms of how the money is actually being spent. And adding on to that, I want also to say that the amendments to the laws in our countries, or if where new laws are being introduced, they should also include provisions to include spending limits for political parties, because the level and amount of money that are actually used are actually quite exorbitant. And of course, the role of private sector in political party funding should also be addressed, because it's one of the major issues which are bringing in the new phenomenon of state capture or political capture in our different countries. You know, when we started hearing about state capture in South Africa, it was a new phenomenon, but several reports that have been carried out, especially by the Sentry report specific to Zimbabwe, pointed out to one specific company which was actually benefiting immensely from public procurement. And during the 2018 elections, that particular company was well known for supporting the ruling party in terms of their campaign. So these are some of the issues that needs to be addressed either through law and also through practice, and also ensuring that those political parties that violate the provisions of the laws are actually sanctioned. Thank you very much, Felix.
Thank you so much, Chikumbu. You make very good submissions around the legal frameworks, and of course we know Africa's most African jurisdictions, the legal frameworks, either weak, even where we have them, there are issues around enforcement or implementation. But yes, we start by making sure that the laws provide for disclosure, putting caps, the things you've been mentioning. But now that I have Theophilus back, I hope you can hear me, Theophilus, because in about 2 to 3 minutes, because I want to open up this discussion to the plenary. So my question to you was around your experience as a journalist, whether you've been able to try to track sources of funding that, especially concerning political parties and candidates in the elections of Sierra Leone, whether through your experiences you've been able to track, even when you've not publicly come out to publish, if your experiences around that, but also what visibly can be done. You talked about the issue that people have lost faith in democracy, whether also the electorate, the voters, interest themselves in trying to find out where this money that comes in form of inducements is coming from, from the experiences of Sierra Leone.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to say sorry for logging off suddenly. It's due to poor internet. I mean, you know, but I'm happy to be back.
I can't hear you from my end.
Okay, all right, okay.
Thank you so much. I am back. I'm sorry for the short break. I just logged off suddenly. Are you getting me now? Are you getting me now, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, very thank you. Very good, very good. Thank you so much. Okay,
proceed. I can hear you.
So in response to your question, like I said earlier, this is a very controversial issue. And as a matter of fact, there is no study that I can lay my hands on right now to say this study is dedicated to campaign financing, like our brothers out there, Henry, have done. Okay, but what I can tell you is that, like my panelist was talking just now about the legal framework, we also do have a legal framework in our country. I mean, it is called the 2002 Political Party Act, and it was reviewed in 2022 and called the 2022 Political Party Act. It gives mandates to a particular state institution called the Political Parties Regulation Commission. It used to be called the Political Parties Registration Commission, but to give it a tougher mandate, they have changed the name to Political Parties Regulation Commission. So from registration, it is now regulation. Now, this commission has the mandate to force political parties to report campaign financing to them, i.e., the sources of the financing. I may know if there are individuals. I may know what is the quantum and all of that. So political parties are obliged to provide this information to the PPRC. But the question is, is there a framework for campaign financing in Sierra Leone? The answer is yes. How has it been implemented? Is $1 million question. Another $1 million question is, where are the challenges if they are not being implemented? And then what is the way forward? So these are the crucial elements, because like I stated earlier, the possibility of rogues investing in our politicians in exchange for political favors cannot be underestimated. Because once this happens, you know, those who invest in politics are very quick to try to find all kinds of ways to try to recoup their investment. And this can only be through corruptive means. And for many people, the quickest way to get rich now is to get involved into politics and being lucky enough to be elected or appointed into any political office. So this is mostly at the detriment of the nation, which is why this conference we are now having is like an eye-opener to me, and I will try to get other colleague journalists to do the same thing as our brothers out there have done, to come out with a comprehensive analysis, or to mainstream campaign financing as a major journalistic issue which we can dig into. And there is a legal framework that we can bank on. And there's also what we call the Freedom of Information Commission. This commission forces state entities to disclose information. It also forces political parties to disclose information on campaign financing. So if I now want to go into any investigation on campaign financing, I know it will be difficult to knock at doors and get the answers quickly, but there is a legal framework that will help me to get the required information. It's just a matter of interest, and I can get there. So that is what I would say.
Thank you so much, Theophilus. I want to now open it up to the participants for plenary. Any questions or clarifications that you'd want the panelists to tackle? This is the time. Like we said, we are live on all our social media platforms. We can pick those questions from within, and then we shall be able to broadcast them and also ensure that everybody.
Avant de parler,
follow.
Avant que le public parle, est-ce que je peux une minute pour une petite.
All right, please, in 2 minutes.
Yeah. Oui. Comme vous venez de l'entendre avec d'autres collègues de Sierra Leone et du Zimbabwe, je pense que la première recommandation que nous pouvons faire, c'est que dans presque tous les États, il y a des régimes, il y a la législation qui fait fonctionner les partis politiques. Mais cette législation-là, la loi n'est pas respectée par presque tous les partis politiques, que ce soit ceux qui sont au pouvoir, que ce soit l'administration. Segundo, il faudrait effectivement que y ait la justice s'intéresse. Parce que aussi longtemps que la justice est restée muette, aussi longtemps que les juges et les procureurs ne s'intéressent pas aux activités des partis politiques, rien ne changera. Parce que qu'est-ce qu'on constate? On constate dans presque tous les États africains, c'est l'argent public que les partis utilisent pour financer les campagnes électorales. C'est presque dans tous les États, que ce soit en Ouganda, que ce soit en RDC, que ce soit au Zimbabwe, c'est l'argent public. Et lorsque ces gens-là utilisent l'argent public, c'est des détournements des deniers publics. Et lorsqu'il y a détournement des deniers publics, normalement, la justice devrait s'occuper d'eux. Ce qui fait que nous, en tant qu'acteurs de la société civile, nous devons mener des actions de plaidoyer pour permettre à ce que, pour demander à ce que les juges, l'institution judiciaire puissent s'intéresser aux activités des partis politiques afin de réguler. Et si les juges ne s'intéressent pas, on peut organiser des réunions, rien ne changera. C'est ça ce que je voulais seulement ajouter.
Thank you so much for that contribution. And indeed, we are at that point where we want to have concrete, feasible recommendations on how best can we improve and increase transparency and financing of election campaigns in our countries. And
going to take a quick round from, let me start with, I know you spoke to issues around the law, but also there are other aspects that speak to citizen participation in how to ensure that they do follow through and put these actors to task to account for the sources. But let me first of all start with Chikumbu quickly as we look at critical recommendations that are feasible for us to improve transparency beyond legislation that are practical, because it's a problem cutting across Africa, and yet we need to see how we safeguard democracy, looking at how money, not to say that money is evil, but money can be controlled in the way it affects electoral outcomes. So, Chikumbu, quick recommendations beyond legislation.
Okay, thank you very much, Ernest. Felix, I have noted that these are issues which are emanating across our countries, and we may say that probably legal frameworks may be a longer route in terms of addressing the issues. But I would want to suggest that as a collective, we may need to engage our regional bloc, especially for Southern Africa, to engage the SADC, and also to engage the African Union in terms of the Charter on Elections and Democracy, to see to it that it becomes mandatory for each of our countries to have these pieces of legislation. Because what I've noted is that most of these regional frameworks, they leave it upon the member state to come up with its own piece of legislation, whether the legislation meets the international standards or regional standards. They don't care. So we need them to actually come up with a standard where all this political party funding is actually modernized and demonstrated. Then the other issue is around the different recommendations that comes out of any election. What I've picked is that from the 2018 elections, there were specific recommendations which were proffered to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and the government through the Ministry of Justice. But come 2023, the same recommendations have not been implemented. So those recommendations ought to be implemented. And what is it that we can do either as citizens in our countries or collectively through our regional bodies to ensure that when they preside over elections in any year, they are also able to follow up in terms of the recommendations that they would have made previously, and possibly sanction the Electoral Commission or the government to ensure that all the recommendations that comes out are actually being implemented. Then specific recommendations, of course, should also be in relation to how the ruling party should be sanctioned in terms of abuse of state resources. I'll give you an example where probably the condition would be if there's no free and fair, or there's actually even access to either campaign funds or the use of state resources. If they are not being followed, then certain sanctions are actually proffered, including nullifying an election. I think you can agree with me that after the SADC Observer Mission report, the preliminary report that was presented, it has actually unsettled the ruling party to the extent that there's actually no movement since the results were announced. So such kind of sanctions, if they are actually being implemented in our own countries, they can actually push our ruling parties to ensure that they start implementing the recommendations and also start ensuring that state resources are not being abused.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm having Dakarai's hand up, but there is interesting breaking news here. I think the military in Gabon has overthrown the government that had been instituted. So something interesting is developing out there is that there is a military takeover in Gabon as well. So just for purposes of keeping you abreast of what's happening. Dakarai, your hand is up. I'll give you a chance to speak. Dakarai, please.
All right. Thank you very much for the interesting papers presented. Just a few thoughts from my end.
Dakarai, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Dakarai. Proceed.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, Dakarai, we can hear. Proceed.
All right.
Yes, proceed, Dakarai.
All right. I wanted to hear from Henry. Do you have a trend analysis of expenditure on public works and services to show that there's actually a jump in the expenditure in an election year? Because there might be a definitional issue around opaque political finance, which might come out, whereby the incumbent might say, you know, we're spending this money in line with our role as fiscal authorities. So, you know, what are the features of election finance that show that we must be concerned on specific expenditure? It's very easy for the incumbents to dodge and say, look, since I'm the sitting MP or the sitting councillor, I am supposed to be implementing this, you know, building this road and so forth. But maybe my question now also to Tafadzwa is raising the problem of the lack of implementation of recommendations on electoral reforms. I think this lack of implementation brings to the fore the role of parliament in election finance, because elected officials are the beneficiaries of opaque finance. And there are also issues to do with the whipping system, whereby even individual policymakers cannot suggest reforms or push reforms because the party is the one that benefits from this opaque finance. So what is the way forward when you're actually lobbying people that benefit from opaque election finance?
Yeah, I think there's also Anis. If Anis has this same, then I'll respond to them at once. Let me first hear from Anis.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you everyone for this great topic again. I mean, this has been a recurring problem that we've been discussing in Africa for decades, and Henry's long experience can speak of that. I'm from the National Democratic Institute. I'm very happy to be part of this great conversation today, and that we've seen over the past years many citizen observer groups that are focusing more and more on the topic, given the huge role that it is playing in general, as you are addressing in this conversation, but also as related to the election and electoral processes more specifically. We've seen many experiences. Some of them were successes in looking at different aspects of the campaign finance and political parties financing, from looking at the incomes or the expenditures or the third parties participations in campaigns, and we see that, yes, true, there is a movement moving towards thinking about more rigorously how groups can be monitoring or looking at that from the civil society perspective, and how to be able to document those issues that are very often very inaccessible to the citizens to get to this type of information. So, not to be long, my question and what I want to hear the speakers about is on two things. The first thing is, especially for you, Henry, that you've been involved in observation or monitoring campaigns, not only in Uganda, but in many countries in Africa. What can groups learn from each other? What can we do collectively? What can we think of to be more rigorous in trying to deter, but also to monitor and to assess what those issues are, and what is their impact on the in general? That's one. And my second question is in continuity to what my brother from Zimbabwe was saying about what can we do and engaging with regional organizations. I think that's a great idea. but also what can groups do collectively? What are the cross-cutting issues that we can monitor together, and tools that we can use, but also how we can be active together in order to make things look better for our countries. And thank you. And thank you again for having us and for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Anis. So let me respond to those two questions. Start with the question that Anis raised about what, based on the experiences in other African countries, what is it that we can do? What is it that we can do and learn from each other? Now, one of the things that are cross-cutting in Africa is that there is opaqueness. Opaqueness in the financing of campaigns. And the reason there is opaqueness is that the governments in power, the incumbents, have this tendency to witch hunt the private companies that have bankrolled the opposition. And therefore, it's advantageous to the opposition to keep their sources of funding concealed. But one thing I have also noticed is that there is a complete lack of oversight. And because there is no oversight and the appetite on the part of governments to do so is not there, the electoral management bodies and other institutions that have been given the mandate to enforce political finance regulations do not seem to be willing to do so. I think we as civil society actors can constitute some form of oversight. And when I say constitute some form of oversight, I mean we can take keen interest in monitoring, in picking up some of the information we can, and then be able to share that. We should be able to call the political parties and other political actors to convene in certain platforms, and we speak to them, so that in the absence of meaningful oversight, civil society can step in and be the oversight and be reporting and be urging these political parties to comply with some of the what are they called, the provisions in the laws. Now, there are also issues with electoral management bodies. The other thing we can do is, I think many electoral management bodies have tended to to perceive of us as an entity that is against them, and this is based on the fact that we criticize them for quite a number of commissions and omissions. But I think we can try to mend those fences and bring them together. So I think that is one thing we can do. But lastly, I think we need to engage at different levels collectively at the continental level. For example, at the African Union level, we need to collectively as civil society to marshal a voice, but also a force that can speak with the power brokers there, because instruments such as the African Charter on Democracy, Governance and Elections will be amended. The African, the AUCPCC, the African Convention for the Prevention and Control of Corruption has provisions that provide for transparency in political financing. But these provisions are never enforced, notwithstanding the fact that this state is trying to enforce it. So I think we can again try to get pressure to bear on African Union, but also the regional economic bodies, and then also at country level, so that we move in tandem to be able to bridge this gap. The last thing we can do collectively, Anis, I think, is the fact that we need now to mobilize and sensitize the public, because the African public doesn't seem to be very interested in issues to do with how political parties are financed, how political candidates are sourced and spend their money. So we need to let them understand, and by letting them understand, to help draw the connection between campaign financing, between corruption, but also between service delivery, so that the ordinary voter in Africa can actually understand that the reason health services are so poor in my place is because I don't have representation. And the reason I don't have representation is because my political party or my candidate was financed by someone who has captured that person or that party, and that person is not serving my interest. They are serving the interest of that we can do. Okay, and maybe also we can get the media on our side so that we can do. But let me answer the question that was raised by Dakarai. Dakarai asks about public works. In the case of Uganda, whether we've been able to monitor the budgets of the public works to see if not they're increasing. The finding we have in the case of Uganda is that these public works that candidates deliver during campaigns, which we have referred to as a form of voter inducement, they do not do so under the cover of government. They do them individually. So what happens in Uganda is that the candidate, whether they are ministers, whether they are individuals like me, myself, I would have to go and source a construction company, which I shall pay from my pocket to go and open up roads in a certain constituency where I am going to stand. And I would then pay them from my own pocket. So you discover that this now has nothing to do with public spending. But also what we have seen that relates to public spending, but also that speaks to the power of incumbency, is that they tend to concentrate the delivery of some of the public works that were planned in the budget towards the election year. There are projects that they are delivered round about election year in order to give the incumbency power, in order to make the incumbent look like they're doing things. For example, in Uganda in 2021, there had been modern markets that had been constructed in different cities. They did not open these even when they were completed. They waited for the last 90 days of the election, which were at the heat of election campaigns. That's when His Excellency, the incumbent president, went around launching and opening them. So to the ordinary voter, they don't now tell whether he's doing this as the president or as candidate, and whether or not by not voting for him, they don't stand the risk of not getting any such similar benefits. So these are some of the things that we have seen. But in terms of recommendations, and Honesty is putting up the hand. In terms of recommendations, I think we have recommended in Uganda. For example, there has been a tendency in Africa to overload the electoral management bodies, where you find the electoral management body has three roles that really are too much. For example, there is that traditional role of organizing and conducting elections. But then you find the same electoral management body is also doubling as the political party registrar. It is done that registers and regulates and monitors, supervises political parties. But then you find that again, it is that same electoral management body that triples as the political finance regulator. So these are three roles of organizing and conducting elections, regulating and registering political parties, and regulating political finance are two big roles. But you find that in Uganda, you find that in Nigeria. For example, INEC had to concentrate on only organizing elections. Even when they had a good law, they could not enforce the provisos on campaign financing because they were offloading. So we recommend, and we can push for this as civil society, that governments consider, what is it called, delineating these roles, so that there is a separate institution that is in charge of managing political parties and another that is in charge of regulating political finance, as we have seen in many other countries in Africa. I'll stop here. I see Ernest, my colleague Ernest, is putting up his hand. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you so much, Henry. Ernest, let me give you the floor, then I'll read the comments coming through the chat section. Ernest?
Oui, effectivement, je vais répondre un peu à notre ami Anis de NDI. Comme vous le savez, c'est l'argent qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, dans plusieurs de nos États, il y a changement de constitution, il y a coup d'État, étant donné que les gens cherchent à accéder au pouvoir pour effectivement contrôler les finances, contrôler les ressources que nous avons. Et je pense que nous, en tant que société civile, nous devons effectivement, au niveau de l'Union africaine, au niveau des organisations régionales, SADC, ainsi de suite, pour que nous fassions les plaidoyers afin de renforcer le régime change, afin de renforcer le respect des mandats. Parce que aussi longtemps que le respect des mandats n'est pas respecté dans nos États, on arrivera toujours à des situations où les gens utilisent l'argent pour corrompre les citoyens, où les gens utilisent des élections, qu'on peut dire élections bidons, pour effectivement utiliser l'argent public pour effectivement corrompre les citoyens afin qu'on puisse légitimer leur pouvoir. Et si vous regardez au niveau de la SADC ou de l'Afrique de l'Est, là où nous sommes tous membres, il y a combien de présidents, il y a combien de régimes? Je prends l'exemple de nos collègues de l'Ouganda. Ça fait combien d'États? Il y a eu changement de constitution 2 fois en Ouganda, si je ne me trompe pas. Et pourquoi on change les constitutions? Parce que le régime cherche à rester en place. Et maintenant, dans ce cadre-là, qu'est-ce que nous, société civile, nous pouvons faire? C'est effectivement de faire des plaidoyers, que ce soit au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Est, pour que ces organisations où les gens ont signé des accords, des engagements, qu'il faudrait qu'il y ait la démocratie, il faudrait que les régimes changent, et après quelques temps, 2 mandats, les gens partent. À ce moment-là, nous aurons d'autres politiciens qui vont venir, et peut-être que c'est ça le commencement même des réformes. Mais dans le cas où un président est 50 ans au pouvoir, qu'est-ce que vous voulez? Vous pouvez parler, vous pouvez faire des réunions, il ne va rien vous écouter. C'est ça le plus grand problème. Vous voyez ce qui se passe au Gabon maintenant. Une famille a dirigé le pays pendant 50 ans. Pendant 50 ans. Or, il y a eu des partenaires extérieurs, nos collègues de NDI qui sont aux États-Unis, peut-être eux aussi devraient nous aider à sensibiliser, à faire des plaidoyers auprès de nos partenaires pour qu'ils fassent respecter les constitutions que nous-mêmes nous avions votées. Étant donné que si nous votons les constitutions pour dire 2 mandats, vous partez, mais si quelqu'un vient, il change ces mandats-là, quelle est la position de nos partenaires extérieurs? Que ce soit les États-Unis, que ce soit la Grande-Bretagne, que ce soit la France, quelle est la position de ces pays-là? Or, vous savez, la plupart de ces États, ils ferment les yeux lorsqu'il y a des changements constitutionnels. Conséquence, c'est soit des révolutions comme ce qu'on a vu au Burkina Faso, soit des coups d'État comme nous le voyons aujourd'hui, et nous retournons effectivement en arrière. Moi, je pense personnellement, nous avons un rôle que nous, citoyens congolais, nous, citoyens africains, de faire pression à ces organisations, à l'Union africaine, au niveau des SADC, au niveau de l'EAC, de East Africa Community, pour que ces organisations, chaque État puisse respecter les engagements qu'ils ont pris en matière constitutionnelle. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. Let me read a couple of comments coming through the chat area from Dakarai Matanga saying, in my view, the perceived apathy of citizens on political party finance is best understood in the context of lack of citizen understanding and participation in public finance and economic governance, which is kept at the technocratic level by political elites. As a result, the citizen is unable to see how opaque funding deprives them of social and economic rights. Yes, talking about the citizen apathy, where it's coming from. And Otim from Uganda is saying that in Uganda, there is a form of political fraud that is emerging due to absence of awareness of citizens. This is evident in how political leaders use public funds in disguise that they are responsible, thus driving an entitlement mentality. Okay, we are having just a couple of minutes to the top of the hour. So I'm going to give every panelist just 1 minute to give a parting shot as we come to an end of the first session panel. So let me start with you, Theophilus, your parting shot in 1 minute. Theophilus, are you there? I don't seem to have Theophilus. Let me give Chikumbu your parting shot.
Thank you, Felix. I just want to emphasize that elections are an important element of our democracy, especially in our continent. But it is unfortunate that we do not invest much in terms of the electoral process. Some of us who work within the anti-corruption realm always keeps the electoral integrity aspect at the periphery of our conversations. But I want to emphasize that elections are very important to us. They define the future, not just of ourselves, but even of future generations. You know, the way countries are mismanaged during our generations can also affect future generations to come. And of course, the discussion around political party financing and campaign funding are also critically important. And we should not just end our conversations here, but keep discussing this and finding solutions in terms of what we can do internally as civil society organizations. How do we mobilize other forces, such as media and other opposition political parties, to ensure that we have laws that protect our resources, that protect our democracy, and also serves the interests of our generations and future generations. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatwa. Now, Henry, your parting shots.
Yes, Felix, thank you. You know, we need to understand what we normally refer to as the political economy of authoritarianism in Africa. And we need to understand that when the leaders in power who use money to entrench themselves seek to have power, it is not power for power's sake, but it is power to access resources. And they want to access resources for self-enrichment at the detriment of the benefit of the citizenry. And I think we need to make sure that the way we package this information is sellable, but also that makes sense to the citizenry, because we need to rally the citizenry behind this. We need to pay attention at money in politics, and especially how we finance election campaigns, because money has been used as one of the tools to undermine the very essence of competition that has turned elections in Africa into zombie elections, such as the ones we've just seen in Gambia, which the military has just outright refused and have taken over. We can avoid these. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henry, for the parting shots. And lastly, let me come to you, Ernest, your parting shots.
Merci beaucoup. Effectivement, ce que je disais là, nous devons effectivement sensibiliser les citoyens pour effectivement qu'on puisse respecter nos constitutions, ça c'est un, et qui est après 2 mandats que les chefs d'État quittent et qu'ils cèdent. Et lorsqu'il y a ces changements, nous pouvons espérer que les choses peuvent se réformer petit à petit. Mais aussi longtemps que nous avons des régimes qui s'éternisent, nous devons peut-être appliquer d'autres méthodologies pour les faire partir, étant donné que c'est nous qui sommes les victimes, c'est les citoyens qui sont les victimes. Et si vous constatez les études des ODD sur la pauvreté, vous constatez que ces 10 dernières années, la plupart des États, au lieu que la pauvreté diminue, la pauvreté est en train d'accroître dans plusieurs de nos États. Et comme conséquence, c'est la mauvaise gouvernance, la corruption, la capture d'État, le trafic d'influence, et ainsi de suite, tous ces mots-là qui nous rongent. Donc, moi, je suis de ceux-là qui demandent à ce que nous mobilisions nos partenaires, nous mobilisions nos citoyens, afin que les régimes respectent les constitutions que le peuple a adoptées à le mandat présidentiel et le mandat législatif. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. And that was Ernest Mpararo, who is from the Democratic Republic of Congo and corruption expert. Let me bring this session to an end, and then I will be with you again in 2 hours from now for the next session, which will be looking at the legal and institutional framework for campaign financing. It's been a wonderful 2 hours having this conversation with you. We can continue having this conversation on our social media platforms. We are take it there and keep it alive and see how we can make Africa a better place and bring back the democracy we want. My name is Felix Kafuma, and till then, bye-bye. See you again in about 2 hours. Let's keep the conversation going. And thank you all of you who have been part of this journey. A luta continua.